Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. So I've been playing around with Ragash, also known as Tony the Tiger, for the last couple of days since I got him from the guaranteed shards. And I have to say, even though I knew going into this that he was very good, he's actually exceeding a lot of my expectations. He's a little bit of a monster. So I thought for this video it'd be kind of fun to kind of throw him into my clan boss team and just kind of see how he does in clan boss. And I got a few things that I want to just note to you guys, the viewers, about some of the tricky things in his kit that you should be aware of if you were to use him in clan boss. So without further ado, let's take a look. So I have a pretty standard clan boss team that I use now. It's kind of like a Mythic comp, but I don't really use any of the auras like Deacon or Fushan here. So I'm running a lot higher speeds than most people would want to run. But what that does allow me to do is effectively run a free champion in the 5th slot here. I normally run Alika because there's an insane amount of damage. You can check my video on Alika if you want to know more about that. So I'm going to run Ragash in this spot here, and we're going to see how it goes. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here, just for context. We can go in the AI tool, and we can see that I've got Demytha here running at 321 speed, pretty fast. Just basically 100% crit rate for damage as best I can, but all she needs is speed and damage. Eris I've got in toxic set at 293. Seeker at 212 in toxic set, and I've gone for as much damage as I can here. And then we've got Jintoro here at 286 speed, and then Ragash at 206. Now, some of the quirks about Ragash. For this particular team, I am not using his fleet foot or his felid, I don't know how to say that, fleetness. It's a 4-turn cooldown to start with, and generally when you're doing a clan boss team, if the increased speed is a 4-turn cooldown, you will have some problems. It needs to be like Eris's ability here, Exhortation, a 3-turn cooldown to enable that kind of rotation. So as Eris here is my speed champion, I do not want to use this buff at all. He will lose the perfect veil himself, but for this instance it doesn't really particularly matter. Now, one other thing that with his kit that's actually quite awkward is his passive Art of Stealth. In my team, I have to be very careful about who takes the stun. I can't have Demytha, I cannot have Eris, and I cannot have Seeker taking the first stun. Once the first stun is over, it's only Eris that cannot take the stun. So in a combination of different affinities here, we can see that if it was a magic affinity, it would target any spirit champions. As there aren't any spirit champions, it normally goes for Jintoro. Why? Because I have on Demytha, I've put Steadfast. Steadfast is considered a buff by the clan boss, so it doesn't pick on that champion, so it goes for Jintoro. That's generally the weaker champion that it wants to pick on. In Spirit Affinity, I need a Force champion, so I couldn't run Ragash here in Spirit Affinity. It would have to be Alika or another Force champion, otherwise Eris takes the stun, and that is bad. In Force Affinity, it will always target the Jintoro because, again, Seeker is running Steadfast. So you have to keep that in mind when you're building these types of comps. Stun targeting on the first stun more than anything else is important. Now, the problem with this passive, the clan boss will not stun and cannot attack in single target mode a veiled champion. This is a trick you can do with Tatura if you caught the faction, not the faction games, that's just finished, the clan boss draft that Deadwood Jedi put on. Hell, Hades used this trick with Tatura to direct the stun towards Tatura by veiling everyone other than him. If 4 champions are veiled and 1 is not, it'll always stun the non-veiled champion. Now in this instance, the veil goes on the champion with the highest ally attack. I had to effectively change my Jintoro build slightly to bring his attack down because he had too much attack compared to Seeker, which meant that in Force specifically, Jintoro would never get stunned, Seeker got stunned, and it would break the turn. So those are the things you have to be careful about when you're using, or if you want to use Ragash in clan boss. His kit does require some adjustments and some consideration when you build him in sort of these combinations. Now, also in reverse, if you didn't want a champion getting stunned, then obviously stick them with the highest attack, and they should never ever get stunned so long as Ragash goes after the champion that you do not want to get stunned. And that's what's happening in this team. Essentially, it'll go Jintoro, Ragash. So Jintoro got the veil. That was a problem. Now it won't be a problem because it will go on Seeker. In terms of any other AI, I open with his A1 so he gets the defense buff because there is no defense buff in this team. And then obviously you could keep his A2 on. Jintoro is doing the decreased defense, but it doesn't hurt to have like a backup, especially when we're fighting into a negative affinity. as we are in this one. Now he is strong affinity here, so he will do a bit more damage than normal. So let's go in and let's take a look at kind of what kind of damage he'll do. I'll start the battle just kind of explaining how the setup works and how the team works, and then I will skip to the end and we'll see how good Ragash is when it comes to being a damage dealer in Clan Boss. So this team is full auto from the start normally, but just to give a bit of an explanation of the team, I'm just going to pull up the Deadwood Jedi calculator so you can see the skill rotations. The way the team works is it normally falls in line by turn 5. This is just for spirit affinity checks and various different things. There is a equation between Jintoro here, who's on at 286, and the Seeker to ensure that spirit is okay, spirit is correct. I'll ping that up on above me here just so everyone can see it in case you want to run this team. I'll also pin the link to this Clan Boss, to this calculator link in the description. That's the only thing you need to know, is that formula between Jintoro and Seeker to ensure that if there was a spirit affinity, you wouldn't have any problems if, for example, one champion resisted the spirit debuff and the other one did not. The calculator here, if I change it to spirit, would always assume that everyone gets the debuff, but in some situations one does not, and it can cause the team to break if you don't follow that equation. So setup here, the first stun can go on anyone in a sense, because we don't have Iris going first, so she's not cleansing. So we need to make sure with the first stun that it only goes on champions that we can afford it to go on. So that means it can go on Jintoro because he's not important for the speed tune, and it can go on Ragash. It cannot go on Demytha, Iris, or Seeker, because if it goes on any of those three, it'll probably break the tune on turn 1 because Iris cannot cleanse before they take a turn. Then once we get to turn 5, you can see we fall into this pattern. Iris runs 3-1. Jintoro runs 3-1. Running a Jintoro at 3-1 is much better than a 2-1, even if the 3-1 build is like significantly less damage, because effectively you get an A3 every turn instead of every other turn, which means you get about 33% more 5 hitters. Now the 5 hitter of that A3 is around about 1 million damage in a decent average build. It can be anywhere between 700,000 to 1 million damage. Just getting 3 more of those in a run will make up for the damage lost in the build. So 100%, if you're building a Jintoro, look to run him 3-1 in these types of teams because you will get much more out of him. Demytha runs at 3-1, so we get the A3 back for the block damage every turn, and then we have just Seeker doing a 2-1 and Ragash on a 2-1. This is a very typical Myth Air type of team. Iris cleanses the stun or the speed debuff. Demytha sets up the Unkillable, Seeker sets up the 2-1, and then we just use in Jintoro for the debuffs. Ragash is the designated damage dealer. So let's get back to the run and let's get it started. So as I said, with this team, it's full auto. So the joy of it, I'm just going to hit auto here and we're going to see that it should work. Now, hopefully Seeker should be the one that gets the veil, not Jintoro this time. My first test, I had to restart it. Why is Jintoro getting this? He hasn't got the highest attack. Oh, I bet I know what it is. So take 2. Turns out that I didn't take into account Jintoro's aura, 29% attack, because Jintoro has 480 odd more attack than Seeker. Even though on the sheet listing he had less attack than Seeker, he actually ended up with more attack. So another thing for you to check, make sure you check all things before you think that you're safe. So we're going to put it back on full auto here, and we're going to try again to see how this works. So hopefully now when Ragash takes a turn, it should veil Seeker. Right, this is great. This is what we want to see. Now it's just a case of we get the setup going. We need to just sort of run through these 3 turns, take the first stun, cleanse it. Once we get to turn 5, that's when we are in tune. That's when damage should be fully up. Now, obviously, Jintoro is negative affinity here, so we do run the risk of debuffs resisting, weak hitting, not working. His damage will also be lower, so we'll just see how it goes. Right now, we're probably going to lose debuffs. We'll have to see what happens. The good thing, as I said, we've got the backup decreased defense, which is more important than weaken, from the Ragash A2. In this team, I'm running double toxic. If you were running a poisoner, you wouldn't be able to do so. Generally speaking, double toxic is fine as long as you've got a pretty reliable and consistent decreased defense and weaken that you can reapply before it expires. That way, once you've got those debuffs on, the poisons couldn't fill the debuff bar. They can at times get to 10 debuffs with double toxic, but generally I've not found it too much of an issue. So we're just coming up to turn 4 here. We've got about 3.8 million damage. The damage early on is pretty poor to start with. We're going to see how this goes now. I have got 1 refresh on Tony the Tiger on Ragash, so he could A2 back to back, which is not a problem. And we should now be in tune. We'll know once we get to the end of this turn whether or not Demytha does her A3. That's when we know we're definitely in tune. There's the 5-hitter going out with a few weak hits, but he's still maintaining that decreased defense and weaken, which is great. We are at maximum turn meter bar here now, so no more toxic sets, but we're going to get 5 proc all at the same time, just to maximize the damage the team can do. Tony the Tiger coming in there with 295k, that's around about 190k. That's not bad, 180k, give or take, on the A1. Let's take a look, see what his A2 does. I think he's got that up next. Swipe to win. Oh no, we're going to go with another A1. This is a new form of swiping, guys. I'm not using my credit card, I'm using the Tiger. We should have that A2 up coming now. Oh no, he wants to use his A1 again. I wonder if his AI is not programmed to use the A2 unless the decreased defense is now. That could be interesting. If he does another A1 here, we definitely 100% know. I'm just going to take it off auto and check. Discoveries with a new champion. Theoretically, he should A2 here. If he A1s, that means you have to tell the AI tool to make him use A2, which could be important if you are relying on the stun specifically. Yes, so he doesn't do his A2 unless you tell him to. Okay, well that is an interesting discovery. Not surprising, because I would say ever since the AI tool has got to the extent where it's really good, they have got a little bit lazy in terms of utilizing the, setting up the AI correctly for champions. There's plenty of examples now with the AI of the champions. Calvalax, for example, just doesn't do what it's meant to do when you want it to do it. So it's important you do the AI tool. We're going to just manual the A2 here. I have a funny feeling that A1ing all the time might be more damage anyway, but we're going to see what this can do. A1 is doing around about 180,000, give or take. Let's see what this does here. That does 180,000 as well, and is a backup decreased defense. So the nice thing here is technically I probably don't need to use the A2. I can probably just keep using the A1 and just let him use the A2 if decreased defense does fall off here, because he is doing similar damage on both skills. So I'm going to run this through now, and when I get to the end I'm going to pull you back in and we're going to see how good Tony the Tiger's damage really is on Clan Boss. And we're back. So it is finished the run. Now obviously I had to nerf my Jintoro damage here. It is also negative affinity for 2 of my champions, so we take that into consideration, but 86.21 million. Jintoro here, if I move my head and my chair, let me hide my camera, is 18.72 million there. We've also got Demytha at 8.2 million. That's quite high. Normally it's a lot lower than that. I'm not too sure why. But Demytha's problem mainly is she only attacks once, so you can't really get much more damage. Era, Seeker, 16 and 19 million. And then Ragash coming in with the lead damage of 24 million. That is not terrible. It's not the best damage I've done from a DPS in this team, but it is a strong amount of damage, especially if you were using him as your decreased defense champion as well and you didn't have a Jintoro in here. You could use him here with maybe a weakened champion instead of Jintoro and change it up a little bit. That could be possible, and rely on his decreased defense. Obviously, if you were to use Ragash in this team, you would need to bring a force and magic champion alternatives here, so you made sure those stun targets were sort of balanced out, otherwise you're going to fail. But 86.21 million, it is sort of an average, I would say. I'm not blown away by it, but it's pretty impressive that he did that much damage only using his A1 really. Now if there was a way to implement his actual full kit, I think there's a potential you could abuse his passive so that you could direct your stun target better by basically ensuring that you veil the champion you didn't want to get stunned. You could potentially use his A3 and get that increased speed up, although 4-turn is a bit tricky. You might have to run some excessive speeds or some other quirky comp, or maybe some coverage with another speed buff. But yeah, Ragash in Clan Boss, interesting test. I just thought I'd throw him in there, see how he did. So that brings us to the end of the video. I probably might do another one on Ragash on some of the other areas in the game. I tend to find that trying to do a champion guide and filling all of the content that we have in Raid Shadow Legends now is actually quite tricky. You've got a combination of faction wars, Doom Tower, you've got a combination of dungeons, potion keeps, you could look at arena. To be honest, arena could be a video on itself now, so I've tried to break it up a little bit to shrink the video durations down rather than doing a 50-minute champion guide, which is probably what I would do just because I like the in-depth analysis of these things. But for Clan Boss, I think Ragash is very interesting, somewhat tricky in places, but definitely if you get him early to mid game is actually an incredibly useful champion, because he does have that decreased defense, self buffing, so he can basically provide his own damage and do the debuff all on his own. He doesn't need anyone else, so he fills multiple roles, which is always useful to have. If you like this video and you want to see more of this type of content, please subscribe to our channel so those videos go straight into your feed, and give this video a thumbs up. I will be back in a couple more days with an interesting couple of videos that you will want to see, specifically around how you acquire rewards in the game. What are we getting on a monthly basis, which I think will be interesting for some people to know. But that's the end of the video. I'll catch you in the next one.